for negotiations. But it is increasingly clear to this report that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
It was about.
But you're saying he doesn't want it done, but he said he wanted it done he said it from the pulpit. Why do you interpret that's not what he wants?
Let's see. Okay, let me try to say it a different way. Maybe that's what he felt like should be done. I mean, it can be said either way. Okay, just to make the short of it, yes, I agree with him.
So, as we see in that case, instead of Cooper really pressing her on the issue necessarily, he's basically just letting the woman provide her opinion, even though her opinion happens to involve, violence towards other human beings. So, what does that mean? What does that shift mean, and what does it symbolize? Where did it come from? That shift comes from the false equivalency factor in modern media. So, in order to understand what this is, again, you have to establish a baseline. So first, some basic definitions. What is bias? Bias is defined as slant journalistic and news producers within the media in the selection of which events and stories are reported and how they're covered. So that basically means that instead of covering what's the most important thing, the journalists and the producers of the news are instead choosing to cover what they think is the most important. Another key term is journalistic integrity, which is defined as the highest standards of behavior through true fairness, sincerity, and avoiding the appearance of conflict of interest. Basically, as a journalist, you have a responsibility to present the truth instead of your own opinion. And next is modern media, which is defined as the era of information sharing begun in the later 20th century and continuing into the 21st century, characterized by the increased consumption and availability of data through news platforms, including but not limited to 24-hour news channels, blogs, and podcasts. Basically, the media we all live with today. We have our smartphones, we have our computers, we have our tablets. We can basically get news wherever we want to, whenever we want to. And the final thing, the main idea of this presentation is false equivalency. False equivalency is the presentation of an issue as more balanced than evidence supports for the sake of appearing less biased. False equivalency is when you, the people that consume media, think bias is so bad that in order to maintain your readership or your viewership or your listenership, newscasters and journalists instead present things as much more even than they actually are. So where did this come from? What are the sources of false equivalency? False equivalency stems from multiple things that have come about through our modern media. One of those things being the 24-hour news cycle. In our modern media, we have channels like CNN, which are literally on 24 hours a day and reporting the news 24 hours a day. That means that news producers and journalists have to find enough information to keep you interested for 24 hours. This means a whole lot more time than they used to and having to cover a whole lot more stories, which in many cases can mean covering stories that seem barely inconsequential. I think the example Andy used in her introduction was crazy cat stories. So, a lot of things that we really don't consider important, which again starts to deteriorate and harm our perception of the media from certain things. Is this really, do we really have a good media if we're taking time to cover stories about cats? Another thing is internet news, sites such as the Huffington Post, which are newspapers that are run solely online. You don't have to pay for a subscription, it's just there on the internet and you can go to it any time of day. Again, this is increased information and a need to create increased information in order to keep people interested. And additionally, internet news is held to a lot less higher standards with respect to journalistic integrity. There's a lot less oversight, so they can job is to not necessarily present the truth or present the stories that are important or present an unbiased view. It's to present the view that's going to attract viewers to his audience. So instead you get very biased things. And this goes beyond Fox News. You could say the same thing about MSNBC, Fox's cultural counterpart. Phil Griffin, who's the president of NBC, or the president of MSNBC, is in the same position as Roger Ailes. He's a businessman, not a journalist. He wants to make money for NBC and maintain that. So that's another part of the phenomenon of modern media. And the final thing is tailoring. Tailoring, just like a person or one of you would go out and have a dress. I know a lot of us are ladies are getting our weekends and prom dresses. So you go to have it tailored so that it fits you best. Well, just like that, news organizations, they are going to tailor who presents their news in order to attract the most people. One of the biggest examples of this in modern media is when MSNBC brought in Rachel Maddow in 2009, and she became very successful. Younger people especially were very attracted to her very bookish nature, very intellectual view of news. So they decided to bring in another journalist, Chris Hayes, who is seen with her in this lovely picture, as someone who's very, very similar to her, has a very, very similar style, to the point that the two of them may even actually been parodied as the same person. Again, deteriorating our opinion of media because we just begin to see them as more and more biased. So we turn towards false equivalency, which is maintaining this idea that if we act less biased, then we are less biased, so people will like us better through the media. But there are many, many flaws that come from this, and this is really something that's harmful to journalism. That's really the crux of what I hope you'll get out of this presentation. So what are the flaws that come from this? Overexposure. Overexposure is basically when we provide, as the definition of false equivalency stated, we provide a lot more coverage to both sides of an issue, when one side of the issue might actually have a lot less of a base in reality. One of the starkest and really most tragic examples of this in recent months has been the case of Yaki McMath. Many of you may have heard of this story. Very sad, a young girl, 13, in California, went in for a routine tonsillectomy and never came out. She was declared dead 6 times by 4 different doctors in the wake of her surgery. However, her family sued and eventually won a lawsuit against the Children's Hospital of Oakland to keep her alive on life support, even though under California law, she was deemed ineligible to stay on life support for an extended period of time. Now, the modern media very much latched onto this story, and they very much gave her family an equal opportunity to provide their take on this issue, as opposed to just presenting the doctors or the courts. Yes, her family did deserve a say in this story, but did they necessarily deserve an equal say when all they were saying was that they had some far-out personal hope that their niece would wake up, whereas there were 6 medical professionals who were saying that this, as tragic as it was, this young girl was simply deceased and had been declared as such, raises some moral questions, but the crux of it all is really the fact that this issue was presented as very, very evenly split, when in reality, it's sad and it's ugly, but it just simply wasn't the case for it to be an evenly split issue. Overexposure. So another flaw of false equivalency in modern media is the idea of underinforming, kind of the flip side of overexposure. Under the laws of false equivalency, one news organization would have to provide a completely even 50-50 take to both sides of an issue. But what happens when one side of an issue is far more complex and it has a lot more detail to it than the other side, which might be more moral-based, more easier to chunk into a little bit of news segment. But you can't provide equal coverage for both because one would take longer, so the issue doesn't get covered under informing of that issue, even though it's very important. One of the central issues in recent months has been the idea of fracking. Fracking is a form of hydraulic mining, which is illustrated by this very complex illustration that doesn't even make sense to me, to be honest, but is basically the idea of drilling underwater into sandstone and limestone underground in order to get fuel, to mine fuel. Now, there has been very little coverage over some of the major issues that a lot of scientists and engineers have had with this, but by the flaws of modern media, modern flaws of false equivalency is that many important things simply don't get covered because they're too complex to fit into the false equivalency mold, so modern media simply doesn't give them any attention. This graphic, put together by Media Matters for America, is illustrating the coverage on nightly news segments of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a new trade treaty that the U.S. Congress is set to pass and that the President is expected to sign into law. However, if you've heard anything about this treaty, you know that it's actually very controversial, and economists estimate that it could indeed cost more than 3,000 American jobs and lead to some serious outsourcing issues. However, as this graph illustrates, ABC, NBC, and CBS showed no reports on this in their nightly news coverage, and PBS only showed one. Yeah, only PBS, your tax dollar network. So again, you get this underinforming issue of something that's very important and that's very relevant to American lives. This is something that has to do with a lot of people that work in factories and work lines. Many middle-class families would be seriously affected by this. But under false equivalency, it gets no coverage, it goes under the radar, and Congress and the President can get away with it, even though maybe if it was getting more coverage and we as a people had a better understanding of the issue, we might be standing up against it and they would be much less likely to go for it. There are also long-term effects of false equivalency. It's simply based on the idea of the First Amendment and freedom of the press. Under the First Amendment in America, we are blessed with the idea that we have a press, newspapers, and magazines, and newscasts that can present us the truth and tell us the stories that are important, even when the people in power or the people who are a part of that story might not necessarily want us to have the whole truth. However, under false equivalency, journalists are forced to quite literally self-censor themselves with respect to what they can cover. If you want to cover one of these issues, such as fracking, or the case of Johnny McMath in a more equitable way towards the side with more support, or the idea of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, well then you're just some crazy out there person who's taking someone's side and you're considered illegitimate and you won't be able to get work as a journalist. So therefore you're forced to self-censor yourself. Put very well together in this quote by the great Jon Stewart. Let's not censor ourselves to comfort our ignorance. And that's really the crux of all of this. The idea that as a society, we can't allow ourselves to become so wrapped up in feeling like we're being even and fair. False equivalency provides this great false sense of comfort in the sense that we think we're being balanced and equal and we're awesome and just getting everything out there and we can go out and make informed decisions. But it's really limiting what we get. When Cronkite in the 60s, as you saw in that clip before, was able to express his opinion on the Vietnam War, he wasn't just expressing his opinion, he was saying what he saw. Cronkite had just traveled to Vietnam. He had just seen the lack of success that American troops were achieving there. And he was able to tell the people what was truly happening and give a factual opinion that was based in what he had observed, which is the job of a journalist, to present what they observed in a way that helps the public to make better decisions and to help us as a society do better. However, as you saw with Cooper in the second clip, Cooper, if he had crossed that woman, if he had said, "Young lady, do you understand that you're quite literally saying you agree with someone who's saying that a certain subset of people should be placed behind electric fences just because of who they are?" You can agree with either side of the issue, but I think we can all agree that that's quite extreme and something that years ago we really wouldn't have let get away with, and on a supposedly mainstream news network like CNN, which it really just raises this important question of we have to not only observe bias in the media. I'm not saying that bias is a good thing in this confrontation. Bias is a very important issue, and it's something that we need to deal with in the media and as a society as a whole, both people in the media and those who consume the media. However, that doesn't mean that we have to simply take the easy way out through false equivalency and allow the media to be degraded once more. This is a very complex issue, and summing it up in a short presentation like this isn't an easy thing. And it's also a very important issue. So I very much recommend that each of you take a little bit of time to look at these organizations. They're each media watchdog groups, which basically means that they are groups of journalists within the media who are trying to raise awareness about issues like false equivalency and making a better media. The graph I referred to with respect to the Trans-Pacific Partnership was actually put together as part of a lovely article by Media Matters for America. Democracy Now!, the Future Journalism Project, Mediaite, and ProPublica also do some really great work on these issues. They have some great examples of good journalism, and I very much encourage you to look into this site, to look into this information, information and to go